The occupation of Israel in Palestinian territories has gone on for far too long, and it must end now. That's the word from South African ambassador to the Netherlands and the acting chief state law advisor, Vusi Madonsela. He presented South Africa's arguments on the second day of the hearings at the International Court of Justice on the consequences of Israel's occupation of Palestine. South Africa is among the 52 countries presenting arguments at The Hague in Netherlands. This is after the Palestinian Authority called on the international community to throw its support behind Palestinians. Since October last year, the raging conflict in Gaza has claimed nearly 30,000 lives. Let's take a listen.
South Africa cannot overstate the significance of this advisory opinion for the Palestinian people, more especially the legal characterization of the situation of occupation and the imposition of the system of racial oppression and apartheid, which have unconscionably been permitted to continue for far too long. The occupation alone has persisted for 56 years. As the UN Special Rapporteur on the occupied Palestinian territories explained in 2022, the occupation by Israel has been conducted in profound defiance of international law and hundreds of United Nations resolutions, with scant pushback from the international community. Consequently, Mr. President, that defiance by Israel has already led to the killing of tens of thousands of Palestinians, including an estimated 30,000 killed in the past 4 months alone. These are not mere statistics, Mr. President. They are flesh and blood of the Palestinian people. Therefore, we must ask, when will Israel's decades-long impunity for widespread and systematic human rights violations and violations of peremptory norms of international law end, if not now?
All right, let's get some analysis now on this presentation and others before it. And we are joined by Omar Shakir. He is the senior Israel-Palestine researcher at Human Rights Watch. Mr. Shakir, good evening to you, and thank you for your time. You would have listened to South Africa's submissions today, and yesterday it was the Palestinian representatives themselves telling their story at the ICJ. Can I ask you this question? What is the fundamental goal of the occupation of Palestinian territories by Israel? What is there to gain for them?
Look, the Israeli government, especially in recent years, has been quite explicit. Their goal is to maintain, maximize the land for Jewish Israelis, and to do so by dominating Palestinians. And they have sought, through their settlements in the occupied territory, to take over Palestinian land, to take over the resources, and to methodically organize everyday life for the benefit of Jewish Israelis at the expense of Palestinians. Maximum land, minimum Palestinians. Human rights organizations like Human Rights Watch have been documenting for years, led by Palestinians, that this amounts to the crime against humanity of apartheid, as well as other grave abuses. And South Africa today, Palestine yesterday, many other states today, many others in their written submissions have made clear that this policy amounts to apartheid. And these issues being presented to the International Court of Justice is a momentous occasion to take stock of that reality, to apply the law, and to call a spade a spade.
You've already made reference to the word apartheid. These practices, no doubt, do amount to discrimination. Is there still doubt among some nations that what Israel is doing in these territories does indeed amount to apartheid?
Look, there's a global consensus that's growing that Israel's treatment of Palestinians amounts to apartheid. Again, Palestinians have been describing their lived reality as one of apartheid for years, for decades. There is a consensus in the human rights movement. It spans not only Palestinian human rights groups, but dozens of Israeli human rights organizations that have used the term, including the most prominent groups like B'Tselem and Yesh Din. It spans global human rights groups like Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, but it's gone beyond civil society. We've seen the former UN Secretary General. We've seen senior Israeli government officials, including a Netanyahu-appointed director of the Mossad, the Director General of the Foreign Ministry, and increasingly we're seeing governments from all parts of the world and large associations of governments like the African Union, like the Organization of Islamic Conference, use the term. Yes, it has yet to fully be embraced by some governments in Europe and the United States, but there also hasn't been really a rebuttal of the underlying facts. Those states seem to prefer burying their head in the sand and failing to recognize reality for what it is. The International Court of Justice now has the opportunity to help develop and reestablish the legal principles and even to show this reality, and the fact that states like South Africa are making this case at the International Court of Justice is really significant. This is the kind of matter that the Court of Justice was created to help establish.
If the number of these countries that are going to make presentations there do concur to a large degree that indeed what Israel is doing in Palestine or in these Palestinian territories is indeed apartheid. Let's remind ourselves that apartheid was declared a crime against humanity by the United Nations. My question then is, why should there be negotiations for Palestinians to exercise their right to self-determination?
Look, I mean, apartheid was not just recognized by the UN, but also it's one of the crimes in the International Criminal Court's statute, the Rome Statute. And indeed, fundamental rights should never be bartered or negotiated. But I think the key point here to underscore is for too long, negotiations and the long moribund peace process. It's been ongoing since South Africa lived under apartheid itself. I mean, the peace process began in the early 1990s. It's been along more than half the life of the occupation itself. The reality is the negotiations have become a fig leaf to mask the reality of apartheid on the ground. Negotiations can never be an excuse to justify war crimes or crimes against humanity. Every day a Palestinian is born in Gaza without the right to free movement, obviously today facing many more worse atrocities. In the West Bank, without civil rights. In Israel proper, to a different legal status than Jewish Israelis. Refugees outside the country denied their right of return. To ask these people to live more days and weeks and months and years without their fundamental rights because there are not negotiations is unacceptable. And I think the Court of Justice is a key arbiter of setting out, reestablishing not only the legal principles, but the violations taking place and the necessity for action by states like South Africa, the countries around the world, to end the atrocities, to dismantle the apartheid, and to recognize the rights of all people in whatever form takes place. There is a role, obviously, we all want a political solution, but the lack of a political solution cannot be the cover or the pretext to deny Palestinians their rights and to justify the imposition of apartheid.
Finally, and very briefly, the South African case that complained that what Israel was doing in the ongoing bombardment amounts to, what was the word? It amounts to genocide. Do you think that it feeds into these hearings, the ones that are going on now, or are these hearings going to be a distraction to what Palestinian people want right here and right now, and that is for a ceasefire to be implemented so that not a single soul dies because of these ongoing bombardments?
Look, these are separate proceedings. The South Africa genocide case against Israel and this advisory opinion on the Israeli 57-year occupation. They are very much complementary, right? I mean, although they're different. The genocide case is a dispute between two states. Israel is participating. It is legally binding, and it is aimed to prevent genocide and further atrocities. So the provisional measures the court issued last month are in effect right now, and there will also be a hearing on the merits. That's vital. But this advisory opinion goes beyond the context of the current horrors in Gaza and asks much more general, broad questions about the nature of Israel's occupation, the legal duties on states and the UN to end those abuses, the legal status, whether it amounts to apartheid, the legal occupation, the right to self-determination, the failure of the international community to impose consequences on Israel and to take steps is the reason for one of the main reasons for the escalation and the unprecedented atrocities we're seeing today in Israel and Gaza. So that must end, and it's vital that the court is looking at that, but that also is not enough. We need there to be this more fundamental examination of root causes, and that's precisely what these proceedings afford.
Omar Shakir, let me thank you very much for your time and insights. He is a senior researcher at the organization